on the rocks, another build his house on sand. And Jesus essentially was saying, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them. See, there's always God saying you have to do something. You have to hear it and do it. Now the reason why he says hear it and do it, because it's quite obvious that if you've never heard it before, you can't really do it. Somebody has to tell you. But after you've been told, and see, God knows who has told you what. You can't use the excuse nobody ever told me. That don't wash unless God knows whether you've been told or not. He knows whether he sent somebody to you to tell you the right thing to do, and you just either obeyed or you refused to do it. So Jesus was saying, whoever heard these sayings in mine and doeth them, I will liken. And then he went into the man who built his house on the rock versus the man that built his house on the sand. The one that built his house on the sand was the one that heard the word and did not do it. And as I said before, just like with solutions to problems, if Christ is not part of the problem, it's going to fall somewhere down the road, and you're going to be in a mess, a disaster. That's what's waiting for you. But anyway, he says, once you do all these things, he says, for then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Now, here is what I want to say to you about prosperity. There is a belief that prosperity is having a lot of money in the bank. Prosperity to a lot of people is having big houses, fine cars, and jewelry, furs, and all of the trappings, if you will, of what we call a wealthy person. And we say prosper, that is prosperous. But once again, man's view of prosperity is very narrow-minded and narrow-sighted. The reason being that there is far more to prosperity than just having a ton of money in the bank and all of the trappings and things that goes with being rich. Let me give you an example. Any rich person out here, let me use for example Oprah or Donald Trump, or we could use anybody that's a billionaire or so forth. These people have a lot of money, and people say, if I only had half of that money, I'd be set for life. Or those people sure are prosperous. They sure got a lot of money and this, that, and other. I wish I had some of that money and things like that. If I had as much as they had, everything would be hunky-dory for me. Would it? A lot of what we don't see is a lot of problems that these rich people have. But that's not what I want to necessarily talk about. What I want to talk about is this. Take any one of them. All of that wealth. And what happens if they go to the doctor one day and the doctor says you have stage 4 cancer of the liver and this, that, and the other, and you're going to die within several weeks or days or whatever. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is this. All of that money that they have, all that wealth, all those houses, cars, and whatever they have, that money, when they could buy anything they want to do, they could probably even buy a country and its people. But all of that money cannot buy them more time in life. Or they can pay for chemotherapy treatments, radiation treatments, call in all the best doctors and so forth, and might get their life to extend it a little longer, but it's going to cost them a whole lot of money for the treatments, and even then the treatments aren't going to work. So what happens to that prosperity? It's not helping them in that situation, is it? Here is what you need to understand, and I define prosperity the way God calls it or defines it. If you want to look at prosperity, read Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 1 through 15. This is the way I define prosperity, the way God would have it. I define prosperity as being that no matter what situation you happen to be in, whether it has to do with your health, whether it has to do with your relationship with your spouse or your children or so forth, the conditions of your living condition, whatever the circumstance is, and including wealth and so forth like that, I define prosperity as true prosperity as being when you are in such a position with God that you have Him and His whole realm of power backing you up in anything that you are facing or anything that you're doing. You wanna start a business? Well, if you got God backing you up, you cannot fail. You will succeed. If you are trying to acquire, I don't know, just name anything. Acquire a spouse, a good spouse, a God-fearing spouse, or something like that, and you doing it the way God says for you to do it, you're going to find the spouse. God will send the spouse to you. If you are been diagnosed with some disease that is killing people like AIDS or cancer or sugar diabetes and so forth, if you are doing what's right according to God, God has the cure for sugar diabetes, AIDS, and cancer. And you seek Him, and He will give you the cure. The homosexual has been talking about the fact there is no cure for. There's no way that people can be cured of quote unquote homosexuality. God has the cure. He's delivered a lot of people, and they've stayed delivered. You hear some people talking about the fact that they've been delivered. They used to be a homosexual and they aren't no more. You check back with them a few years later and they back into it again. Goes to show you what can happen if you're not really seeking God and doing what God tells you to do in order to get away from this. So prosperity essentially is a case where you really cannot fail in anything that you try to do. And when you're doing that, then as the second part says, you will make your way prosperous. Then it says, and then thou shalt have good success. Well, that's what we all want, isn't it? Success. We want to have success in everything that we try to do. Well, that success will only come about if God backs you up in everything that you're doing. And that is true prosperity. The scripture says that if God be for you, who can be against you? If God be for you, who can be against you? That's something that we ought to take heed to, because if God is not for us, then that means he's against us. He only goes two ways. He's either for or against. He's never sitting in the middle. He's not lukewarm. He's either hot or cold. He's either for or against. Jesus said, those who are not against us are for us. He never did say those that sit in the middle and do nothing, they're just out there. He always addresses either for or against. So if God's not for you, he's against you. And if God is against you, all of these things that you call yourself trying to do to make things better for yourself, going to be a disaster. And while I'm on this, I'll get into that on another message, and that has to do with affirmative action. That is a solution that black folks came up with, supposedly to try to help the black race gain some sort of footing in the economy and so forth, to help lift up the standards of living of the black community. And here we are some 30, 40 years later, and what do we have? I think it's worse now for us than what it was before we had affirmative action in some aspects. In fact, I know it is. But you see the point. That's because affirmative action was a solution we came up with that God didn't have any part in. And as a result, you see how we are consistently trying to hold on to that little thing by keeping politicians in office that support affirmative action, and yet still we're steadily going downhill. That's an example of what happens when you're trying to solve a problem the way that you think it ought to be, and if God's not in it, it's not going to work.